We have some significant NBA news, and there's going to be some more. And I think we're going to get a fairly newsy second week here, so we'll see. And by the time this pod comes out, but I would say the most interesting thing that's happened so far this week, at least as we're recording this, is the three-way trade between the Heat, Jazz, and LA Clippers, where Norm Powell went to Miami, John Collins to the Clippers, and Kevin Love, a second-round pick. And I don't even remember what the other piece was. And that
Kyle Anderson, the other guy.
Kyle Anderson, slow-mo. So the Clippers have prioritized clearing cap space for 2027. That's how they set Kawhi Leonard's deal. That's how they have elected to set James Harden's deal. And they just were not interested in extending Norm Powell, at least not at a number he was interested in doing. And so Norm Powell was probably not going to be a Clipper for very long, and so they traded him. Miami was able to essentially really do well in this trade. Slow-mo is a backup. Kevin Love only played 23 games last year, although some of that was to be with his father who was dying. It wasn't all due to injury, but still, Kevin Love was a bit player for them. Kyle Anderson a backup, and they were able to deliver themselves a borderline all-star friend of the pod, Norman Powell. So Bontemps, that was for a team that was in need of a talent influx, and certainly I'm not saying they're ready to win the East, but that was just from their transactional value. That was an excellent move from Pat Riley and the Heat front office, Andy Ellisberg, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating deal on a lot of levels. I mean, obviously, you just laid out the Miami part, right? They turned a couple spare parts of the second-round pick into Norm Powell, and whether Norm starts or comes off the bench for Miami next year, they just got a lot better adding him to their team. You look at the Jazz, we go back.
Well, we'll go.
I guess about a month ago.
We're going to go.
We're doing this one team at a time. Okay.
We're going to start with the Heat.
Well, for Miami, certainly we have talked a lot about how the Heat are sort of stuck in no man's land, and it's unclear what direction they're going in overall. But they are a team under Pat Riley and Andy Ellisberg and Eric Spoelstra that is always going to try to be competitive day to day. And this is a move that, without sacrificing any long-term assets, allows them to be a lot more competitive this year in what is, as we've talked about many times, a very down and very wide open Eastern Conference. And, you can make an argument adding a guy like Norm essentially for free that Miami could be a team that is a top 4 team maybe in the East at the end of the day, or at least has a chance to be. And before this trade, you wouldn't have said that. So I think this trade's a clear win for everybody involved, but that's why I think it's a clear win for Miami.
So MacMahon, if you look at Jimmy Butler, he was making $50 million. They have essentially broken that $50 million into Andrew Wiggins, who they acquired as part of the Jimmy Butler trade, Norm Powell, and Davion Mitchell, who they picked up kind of in an ancillary part of that Jimmy Butler trade, and they've re-signed. He finished the season really well for them. They re-signed. Obviously, that's not going to lead any NBA Today broadcast, but they have pieced it together a little bit. And considering that there's not a clarity after like number 3 or 4 in the East, I suppose that there's something to be said for piecing those 3 guys together out of the Butler trade.
Yeah, and Norm Powell obviously gives him a lot more juice offensively. You say he was a borderline all-star, didn't make it last year. His chances of being an all-star certainly increased by moving to the Eastern Conference.
That's
Competition's
true.
Not quite as tough. Now, we'll see how much of his success last season with the Clippers was influenced by playing with a table-setting point guard like James Harden has really become at this stage of his career. But this is a no-brainer for the Heat. Like Bontemps said, they gave up, a backup and kind of an end of the a bench veteran, a guy who's had a great career, but Kevin Love's an end of the bench veteran. They weren't even the ones who threw in the second-round pick. So it's a no-brainer talent acquisition move for the Heat. I think probably the team that's most interesting in this deal is the Clippers, though.
Yeah, so the Clippers, they needed a frontline power forward. It's hard to expect Kawhi Leonard to play huge minutes there. They had Batum, who they did bring back. They talked him out of retirement. Batum's been talked out of retirement for like 3 straight years now. How many more years is he going to get talked out of retirement?
So every year you can make $5 or $6 million.
That's a good place to start. So they obviously had Batum there, but I don't know if you want Kawhi playing huge minutes there. So now they have a frontline power forward. They add Brook Lopez, so they've really bulked up their size. Look, Collins is a player who is limited. He has been limited throughout his career, but he's also got some positives. Otherwise, there wouldn't be teams who would want him and pay him what he's making. But the Hawks struggled to trade him for a while. The Jazz struggled to trade him for a while. There's a reason. He's got limited value. Sure. The interesting thing is they've opened up this hole at shooting guard because Norm Powell was a really important piece for the Clippers last year. He played a very important role, especially scoring, especially while Kawhi was out. And so there's been this, maybe not assumption, but belief that could be Bradley Beal's landing spot, who is potentially on the verge of getting bought out from the Suns. It's been on the verge for quite some time. We'll see. Maybe by the time the spot is out, it'll be there. But, Bradley Beal at $50 million is underachieving. Bradley Beal at $4 million, which would be the minimum, or maybe they can give him the biannual. I'm not sure. Whatever it is, all of a sudden there's a whole different value proposition. But I'm sure there's going to be other people bidding for Bradley Beal. That said, if Bradley Beal had a starting level role sitting there with the Clippers to go to, that would be compelling. And one wonders if the Clippers if they are not uncertain about Bradley Beal's intentions by making this trade, Bontemps.
Yeah, from the moment this trade happened, the only logical thing you could look at was that Bradley Beal would wind up with the Clippers with John Collins, and they would get markedly better as a result because the Clippers are trying to compete next year. And while John Collins and Norm Powell are similar players, I think, in value, which is why they ended up getting swapped for each other, they aren't similar players in terms of fit. And when you look at this Clippers roster, they right now basically only have James Harden who can do anything with the ball. So Bradley Beal would obviously slot right in there, play a huge role for them. And I think the reason we've been waiting to see where Bradley Beal will go and when this buyout process will start is because there hasn't been any clarity on where he'll land. And I think that's been part of what the holdup has been. And ironically, one of the other places that has been rumored as a place for him to land was Miami. And with Miami getting Norm Powell in this deal, on top of the fact that the Clippers open up this spot at shooting guard, you certainly wouldn't think Miami's an option for Brad Beal anymore either. So all that points to the Clippers winding up with Beal, who I think is a similar player to Norm Powell, and John Collins in the same deal. Pretty good return for that.
Well, it's a great situation for Beal. He's going to have to give back about $14 million on the buyout to make the math work for the Suns. He won't make that up in year one, but I assume it'd probably be like a 1+1, 2-year deal with a player option, that sort of a thing. Have a chance to more than make it up next year and to be put into a situation where he's got a starting role on a competitive team, a team that certainly expects to be back in the playoffs. I think there's some family ties for him in LA. Certainly a lot of NBA players enjoy Los Angeles. And, if he's moving his family, I'm sure there'd be some appeal there. And then John Collins to me is really interesting. I'm not sure that he starts. To me, it makes a lot of sense to have him paired with Brook Lopez as often as possible. Lopez obviously is not a role man. He's a guy who at this point in his career, he spends a lot of his offensive possessions spaced about 27 feet from the hoop. John Collins is still one hell of a lob catcher. And, the problem with John Collins in Utah was he was too damn productive last season. I don't even remember all the injuries they came up with to make sure he didn't play. But seriously, they limited him to 40 games last year. He played less than half the schedule. He played in 70+% of their wins. They won. They didn't win a lot, but they won too often with John Collins in the lineup, and he was a reason. Like they had to get rid of him. They couldn't have him on the roster. They might win too much with him.
They got fined for protocols. I can't remember. Was he the reason they got fined,
Everybody
or was
was
that
the
something
reason.
else?
Right. Come on, dude. They had him. They had Sexton. They
And
had
it goes back
Clarkson.
to
They had
Austin Aegis
Markkinen.
comments. Yeah, it goes back to Austin Aegis, the comments a month ago when he got hired, when he said we're not going to manipulate lineups anymore. And people took that as they were going to try to win. What it really was they're not going to stop sitting. They're going to stop sitting guys and just not playing guys who are on the roster. They're going to play young guys and see how it goes. And we've seen over the last month, they moved on from Kyle Sexton, they moved on from Jordan Clarkson, now they moved on from John Collins. It's very clear what the motive is.
Okay,
which is
so that
to
brings
give
the
these young guys
question.
minutes to play.
Are they going to move on from Lauri Markkinen?
That's the question that you're hearing a lot of. I would say I don't think it will be immediately, because I don't think that, just logically selling low on Markkinen doesn't make much sense. I think if they're going to trade Lauri Markkinen, they need him in the lineup and they need him playing well. They need him, showcasing that he's a 7-footer who can do a lot of things in terms of scoring the ball. Last year was a bad year for him. It was obviously a wonky year and in and out of the lineup with all that stuff going on. But I think they can have Lauri Markkinen in the lineup, and they're still going to be the 15th best team in the Western Conference this year.
He also has 4 years and $196 million left on his deal.
Yeah, I think he's got to rebuild his value a bit to get to the place where they would like to turn him into asset-wise.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the Jazz have to meet the salary floor.
Sure.
And they have a $27 million trade exception that they're using basically to stay above the salary cap that was created in this. They could use it for a number of different things as the season goes along. They could still use it in free agency if they wanted. But I will say that, while I agree with you that I don't think Markkinen is getting traded in the next few weeks, I know that this is not necessarily what he signed up for. So keep an eye on Markkinen.
I hear you, but did Markkinen think they were going to be good soon? No, I agree with you on the keep your eye on him, though. But I'm not going to sit here and play violin music for him. I don't think
this is what he thought they were going to do. I think that's a fallacy.
Sure
now, he may not be able to do anything about it.
He also made sure he was going to be on the team all last season, too. So,
I remember he timed it to where he had
willingly signed up for this thing.
Yeah, he had a 1-year no-trade clause. But yeah, hey, Lauri Markkinen, I think, might have the most games played of anybody now without a playoff appearances in terms of active players. If not, he's right up there. And I think you look at, they're very early in a rebuild, and again, they need Ace Bailey to pop because there's none of these other guys have flashed star potential. We'll see if a Cody Williams or one of these other guys might, but they haven't to this point. And they dumped all their vets. They dumped Clarkson. They dumped Sexton. They dumped John Collins, and they, for a net of no picks, they attached a pick to Sexton, which I'm confused still. And then they got a pick back for Collins, and then Clarkson was just a buyout. But they cleared it out to where they will be, if it was a 24 and under league, I think I don't know, because their summer league team's not even that good. I was going to say I think they'd be
the
real
Thunder
tough.
might win that one.